see what happens, I guess.
I didn't have any luck.
Are you doing that to
Let me
speed
know
up
how-
drying? Is that the
No,
goal, to speed it up?
slow down drying so it doesn't crack.
Boil them.
I don't want to just wrap them because I don't want them to mold.
Hmm.
Try
Cool.
boiling them. I've never tried it, but I read that gives good results. Speeds up the drying by about 50%.
I think Dale Larson does that, doesn't he?
He does it on his,
Let's say you want to dry them. I want to keep them
not
green.
Myrtle.
I'm
He does
working
it
now
on-
full time. It's not going to get to them for a while.
Yeah, he does it on Madrone
Madrone.
because it's so likely to crack.
There
Well,
was
that's roughed out, you know.
there was a fellow who presented on the AAW Zoom symposium a couple of years ago, I think from Vancouver, who gave a wonderful talk on drying. And he distinguished several different ways or several different issues with wood and drying. And he ended up recommending boiling as the sort of
Well, I
one.
don't want to dry it.
It.
I don't want to dry it. I just don't want it to crack. I'm trying to preserve its green state for as long as I can. I mean, I don't want to pond it, but that's the only other thing I can think of.
Oh,
Okay.
I mean, I know it'll still dry out in the freezer, but it's supposed to slow it down from what I read.
and the reason, and what's your goal with wanting to not dry it, but slow?
Because they're like 5x8 hollow form blanks. I want to turn them green still.
So it's
And I don't think they're not
ease-
going to dry. It's going to move no matter what. If they dry, they're going to, I don't see any way that wood that thick is going to dry without cracking.
Hmm.
Just give you
He's
more
just trying
time to get to
delay
it.
when he can get to it.
What, David?
Sounds like he's just trying to delay when you can get to him.
Yeah, basically.
What I
don't
did
know. I
read,
guess I'll report back on it and tell you guys how it goes.
what I did read about the boiling, and I've never talked to Dale, but I know he does do it, is it doesn't eliminate the dry time completely, but it does shorten it a bit. But what it does is gets into the deeper cell structure in the piece of wood, and where a lot of the stress and strain that I'm paraphrasing here exists, and then it relaxes all of that. The process of boiling it does that. It doesn't dry it out necessarily, but that's the basis. I think why people do that is to prevent cracking, is it gets into the deeper parts of the wood.
It's a little bit like spoon bending.
Yeah,
little
but
bit.
I don't know. I think boil something 6 inches thick to get penetration. It'd have to be in there for probably a full day.
Yeah, Dale boils.
An hour per inch is what I think I read. Yeah.
I've experimented a little bit with freezing as well.
That's what I'm asking about, Steve.
Yeah. And so what I would do is I would stick something in the freezer overnight, and then in the morning when I left for work, I'd put it on the garage floor. And that way, when I drive home at night, I see it on the garage floor and I put it back in the freezer. So I just repeatedly froze and thawed the thing. And I got some better results from plum that way. Plum usually cracks horribly. I don't know how it would do with a bigger piece like you're talking about, but I would try it.
Well, I just threw a few pieces in the freezer just to keep them in there.
Mm-hmm.
I know John Jordan does it, but I couldn't find the article that he wrote on it as far as the process. But what I read, you could just wrap it in plastic, throw it in the freezer, and should be able to store it for quite a while, right?
Right.
And then John said he had trouble where when he took it out and turned it, it all cracked. And I don't know if there's a special procedure when you thaw it out to prevent it from thawing too fast or something.
I don't know. My pieces that I tried were rough turns, so it was something that wasn't a solid piece.
Mhm.
You want to slow down the thawing process, throw it in the fridge.
That would work.
Yeah.
Something to
I
try
got some
anyway.
walnut sycamore and
Hey,
some
Kevin.
ash in there right now. So what's that?
Kevin, I was gonna say, what's his name that's in Sherwood that has all the YouTubes? He stores his stuff in water in barrels.
Carl?
Carl
Jacobson.
Yeah.
Jacobson?
Yeah,
Yeah, I thought about that too, but
but I asked
I have
him,
a freezer,
would-
but I don't have something to pond all this stuff
I've
in.
only stored.
I did do that.
I've only
I got
stored
some black locust
Padron.
burl back in May, and I cut it up, threw it into a bunch of like tough totes with water and some bleach. And I kept it in there for about a month and a half before I was able to get to it and do anything else. And it worked well. Nothing cracked at least, and it was sitting outside with unbeaten on the tubs. Yeah, it's definitely an option. I just don't have the room to pond all this stuff. And then also it's gonna get nasty and you gotta deal with
It does.
clean it up.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, little bleach in the water, 5-gallon bucket with a lid.
That'd be a lot of 5-gallon buckets.
Yeah.
I think I need a couple watering troughs, or big feed troughs, and then just tarp the top of them or something to close them up. Or put a piece of core ply or even plywood on it or something to keep the rainwater out.
I don't
But I don't
understand
know.
why.
I'm not ready to go to that process. I live in a suburban area and I don't have acres of land to have tubs.
I was gonna say, yeah, you might get a little bit of pushback if you did that in your driveway.
Yeah.
I don't see how you have more
pond.
freezer space than bucket space.
Yeah, although, I threw about 7 blanks in there and it's full. We have an extra fridge freezer in the garage and I realized we haven't pulled anything out of that freezer in about a year and a half. So I tossed everything that was in there and threw some wood in there instead last night. We'll see how it does.
Oh,
Well, what you need is another 20 hours in a day so you can get to these things quicker.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. Or if I could win the lottery so I didn't have to go back to work.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
your odds of having 20 additional hours are about as good as winning the lottery.
Yeah, that's probably true.
So the special topic I put in there was, how far do you go on a project before you call it quits? And and that came to me just not out of the blue, but I've been working on this piece that I should have quit probably days ago, but it's a beautiful maple burl. And it had a lot of inclusions and it just was a ratty piece of wood. But the way I looked at it is making a bowl. I could cut away most of the bad stuff with the curve at the bottom of the bowl. So I started out with a 9 or 10-inch potential blank and started cutting all that away. And more bark inclusions came. So I cut more and more away. So now I'm down to about a 6-inch blank. And I thought it looked pretty good. The one problem I was always worried about was the tenon had a little bit of a bark inclusion in it,
Oh,
maybe about 20%. And I
Ooh.
thought I could survive, but
I was gonna say, that's a good way to have to dodge a bowl.
and you're right. So I was almost done on the inside, but probably about halfway down. And obviously it happened. The tenon snapped off. So I still had room at the bottom of the bowl. So I made it a little bit shorter and put a new tenon on it. And even though I thought I was done with the outside, obviously there's no way that you can do a new tenon and not have it go out of round. So I got the new tenon and probably took another 3/4 of an inch to get it round again. So now I'm down to about 5 inches. And so I went back to the inside and it was looking pretty good until I got to about 2/3 of the way down. And then there's about a 3/4 of an inch bark inclusion at the bottom.
Oh, geez.
Some wood is just
run into
bad.
is
Yeah.
I was gonna say, at
I
that,
would move on.
But
that's,
the
that's a
burl is,
study in frustration, Roger.
it's a beautiful piece of wood. I kept telling them,
Yeah.
it's a beautiful
Sounds
piece
like
of
pens
wood.
and bottle stoppers to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's too late now.
Well, I kept on. So I did the coffee grinds and CA glue on that bottom and filling 3/4 of an inch. I should have, I started out using the epoxy, but my epoxy was bad. So I didn't have any workable epoxy. So I went to the thick CA glue. And if you ever use that, you know, it takes forever to dry. And I let it dry overnight, but the next morning when I turned it on and made my first cut, more of the glue flew out. And so I had to start over. But
Put it
Did
in the
you
freezer.
put it on in layers?
I thought I did, you know, I put a little bit in, spray it with the accelerator, put a little bit more in, spray it. But 3/4 of an inch that's a lot of CA glue.
Yeah.
Epoxy
Well,
would,
plus if
would
it seals on the
Are you
outside, then
using-
it's like it's back in its own bottle, you know?
yeah.
Mm.
I
So
was going to say
Are
the
you
problem that I've
using
run
that
into
wood stuff?
is I like using a I don't know what to call it, a reverse tenon. Rather than putting the tenon, I hollow out a little bit and use the outside of the jaws on my chuck,
yeah,
because then I can form a nice bottom and not have to, you know, get rid of the nubs and everything else, which tend to be problematic for me. But
Yeah.
I've put too much pressure on it at times and just cracked it that way and just blown it. Or a lot of times it won't blow the piece up, but now I have to get rid of that outside, right, and create a new tenon. So I'm losing a whole lot of distance at the bottom there. So I don't know if there's some, I don't know if I'm just not doing the angle on my,
well, recesses are, I mean, I use the recesses a lot, but you do have to leave a lot of wood outside the recess so you don't pop it out.
right.
But it doesn't need to be very deep, right?
The other
Right. It's surprising how
the other important
short
thing-
it can be.
Yeah.
Yeah,
John,
I had
John
made
was
it-
trying to get in there. He's really quiet.
I had made a
recess
tool.
tenon-
I had made a tool that had the correct angle, but it's a tool that comes to a point. Now I've seen these tools where so consequently getting the tool in at that angle, I'm actually using my tailstock as my tool rest because to do that recess. I've seen some tools that have that little angle where you can go in at 90 degrees and cut in that little the recess tenon thing there.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
about a
I've got
7 degree.
I've got one that was made by Technitool, the Nova. It's custom cut to the right angle for the dovetails and Nova jaws.
Yeah, and again, I've got mine that's at the right angle, but the tool comes to a point like this, right? But instead of being 90 degrees or whatever, it's got that slight 7 degree or whatever it is. But in order to get that into the crevice,
Oh, I back depends on how you do it. Is your tailstock just getting in the way?
correct,
The tool too long? Okay.
precisely. So I actually
Yeah.
use the tailstock as my tool rest, which it gets a little hairy. So
Are you between centers or are you on a screw chuck or a faceplate?
it's
How's your piece mounted when you're doing
yeah,
that?
that's a good point because I'm between centers. If I use the faceplate, that's a good idea because if I use the faceplate, then it would be open and I would have a lot easier time doing it.
Yeah,
That's
you just
those
lose the
tools are
freedom of
designed for
adjusting the
faceplate
piece.
or screw chuck.
Which is where I would just make a regular, I don't use a recess, I don't use a regular tenon, but I'm able to do stuff between centers and make the tenon, you have no issues with access. But I think if you're doing a recess, you need to be able to get the tailstock out of the way, so you need to be mounted on a faceplate or screw chuck.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
seen tools that are
Uh,
shaped the
take
other
out
way
there.
where that angle for the recess, you go into the piece more at a 90 degree angle. The part that makes your recess is on the side of the tool.
Yeah, you push it in and then pull it out from side.
Right.
Yeah, I'd still see if I could get at least a short tool rest in there, using the tailstock as a tool rest just makes the lever arm for that tool really long.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've had it. I've
I
had it
do an Allen
bad
wrench.
catches and the like. So that's a dangerous game. So
Yeah, John was saying something about an Allen wrench. What was that, John?
Yeah, I took an Allen wrench and I ground it because it's short, and then I heated it up with a torch and bent it. So I can use a tool rest and do a recessed tenon. The most important thing I find with a recessed tenon is sizing it correctly for your jaws. If you're too small or too big and you're not getting that 1/8 inch gap between your jaws, then you're not contacting fully around your recessed tenon. And I have more blowouts if I don't size them perfectly than if I size them perfectly, because you're putting a pressure point on a smaller area if it's too big or too small.
So John, that I was considering doing the same thing because I've got a bunch of Allen wrenches lying around. My problem is that those Allen wrenches are at 90 degrees. Now, you said you heated up and bent it. I don't have that capability. So
I was gonna say propane torch will do it.
Yeah.
Reporter at Large, published in the print issue of the New Yorker with the headline "Impaired."
That's how I do it.
Not sure where that came from, but
Oh, Mr. Wood was his phone was joining the conversation.
Yeah.
The other thing, Dean, is if you make a big enough recess, and I mean width, not depth, and you can get outside where the your tailstock is, then you only need about 1/2 inch of flat space to get your jaws in there. You don't have to clear out the whole recess at that initial time.
Not at that point in time. You can do that later as you're cleaning it up.
I still run into a problem because I want to get that tool to cut the recess at center, which is of course right where my tailstock is. So
Why do you want it at center?
well, how can you do a recess at 12 o'clock? You know, I'm coming in this way, right? I want to come in at 9
but you
o'clock.
don't have to be at the middle of the piece center.
Well, what you do is you mark out the bottoms so that you know how big you're going to do it, and go in just a little bit closer to the center than that. Go in and pull out, because that tool will give you sufficient for the jaws to have a flat surface to go on.
So what do you do? Go in right above the tailstock or right below it?
To the side.
I go in from the side. I don't try to do it on the top,
Yeah.
So
because it's too easy for it to come flying. The tool to come flying at me if I go in that way.
Yeah,
But
I'm
the
just not
safest thing-
explaining myself because the way I've got the angle, so if the center is right here, you know, I've got to come in at an angle like this, and I'm hitting that.
yeah,
Put your piece on a screw chuck.
Yeah, that's what I
say. Screw chop the faceplate or something similar.
Yeah, the key is using the faceplate.
Yeah, that's the safest.
That's the safest. That way you've got it, well mounted.
I saw a demo by this guy, Dan Tilden. He's in Southern Oregon.
Yeah.
And he turns a lot of Madrone. And I was really amazed because he showed up with this wet Madrone block he was going to turn. And then he just used super glue to glue a piece of wood to the base of it. And that was what he attached his chuck to. He doesn't want to waste his good Madrone.
Okay, so he's making a waste tenon out of the whatever scrap wood he uses to super glue.
Right.
Wood block.
And I was just wondering for something like Rogers, which has got inclusions and things like that, if that's a way to sort of preserve the pretty wood without having a weak tenon.
Yeah, it would be.
You were too far down the road to consider
Yeah, you
that.
didn't know. I mean, right.
No, I'm just saying gluing a waste block and turning it just being held by glue, that makes me feel uncomfortable.
That works.
Is that any worse? Is that any worse than super glue is a pretty solid connection. Is that any worse than a tenuous tenant?
Yeah.
Probably
Good
not.
alliteration there, right? Ah,
Sorry, that's what came out.
You're trying to pick the worst of the best of the worst solutions.
Well, we
that's
talked
good.
about using,
Anyways, that's the I have another piece came from the same stock that's full of inclusions, and I'm trying to figure out what I can get out of it.
That one may be worth gluing the block to.
Yeah, but I tell you, the other thing that I think we all know is that once you take something out of the chuck, putting it back is probably about 99% sure it's not going to be exactly round again.
Yep.
Even though, my standard practice is to always mark the mark one spot on the tenon on my jaws, so I can at least try to get it back where it was, but this never is exactly perfect.
No, and you probably never will.
Yeah. And of course, the other thing with a bowl blank, as you start hollowing it out, you're going to remove some tension there, and the rim's going to start to go out around just a little bit. So
kind of all depends on your priorities. If you're a guy who turns for your own enjoyment and you're not trying to produce pieces and sell pieces and such, then you can spend time. But if you're a guy like Dale who tries to turn hundreds of pieces,
yeah,
he'll tell you never to waste your time on bad wood,
yeah.
and to learn to use your fireplace as avidly as you use your freezer.
Yeah, I was thinking of Dale when I was doing that.
Yeah.
If he was looking over my shoulder, I'm sure he would have told me about a dozen times by then. Move
At
on,
least.
move on. Life can be better than this.
I was just saying, when it blew up, he would have said, "Give up."
Firewood in, firewood out.
Yeah.
No, I think that one of the last bowls I turned, I was like on the final cleanup cut, and it shattered. I was like, well, that was not fun. Fortunately, it didn't shatter at the tenon. It shattered in the bowl rim itself.
There was another good lesson learned there was always have your face shield on, because what I was doing when the tenon snapped, I didn't think I was putting much stress on the piece, and it sure caught me by surprise.
I was gonna say, did the face shield actually get involved, or did it go over your shoulder?
No, it hit. It hit.
I think my strategy, in answer to your question, Roger, I think my strategy, if I'm working on a functional bowl and I start to run into those issues, I'll set it aside pretty quickly, because I've already got 100 bowls sitting around the house, and I don't really need another. However, if I feel I can make it into art, then I'll continue working on it. If I can, what does John Jordan say? If it can't hold soup, it's art. And but I mean, if something happens to it, like a bark inclusion or whatever, and you can make it kind of interesting and artistic, then I'll continue working on it. But yeah, no, there are times I put 30 hours into a piece, and at the end of it, I go, I couldn't sell this for $50.
Right.
Yeah.
But
yeah, the difference between John and us is that John can sell that piece of art for 2,000 and we can't.
Exactly.
Well, maybe not 2,000.
Maybe more.
Well, I think the wisest thing is set it aside and come back the next day, because you get emotionally attached to, I think, pieces, and you're sure you can fix it, and you know how to fix it, and you like fixing problems, and you just keep going at it.
At some point, you get to I've invested too much. I don't want to give up.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Doing hollow forms, I can tell you, you learn pretty quick. You can't get attached till it's off the lathe, because
Right.
anything can go wrong at any time with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I had
I've got a question.
making not long ago where I was making an urn shaped thing, and it was relatively tapered at the bottom. Had the shape very nice on the outside, and I used my Forstner bit to pilot that hole and went too deep on it. And it went right through the sides, and now I've got a shape with holes on both sides with
A tulip funnel.
right.
That's
I'm
where
wondering how I
dig and
can
cover
maybe I can mount that from the top, reshape the bottom because it didn't crack perfectly. Reshape and then attach something to that bottom.
If
Got
it's
lots
a
of extra
Forstner
time on
bit,
your
you
hands.
could make a tenon the size of the bit and just glue that up inside.
Right, I would still have to smooth it. Yeah, that's a good idea because then I wouldn't have to smooth it. Then I could just put it on there, reshape the bottom piece because it's a little where the hole went through. It didn't break cleanly.
Of course not.
But I love that idea because I was thinking I needed to smooth that side out and glue something to the bottom of it. But if I take something and as you say, make it the size of the hole, the Forstner bit, force it up in there and glue it.
Are you gonna, your urn has, the top comes off, right? Otherwise, that's a great place to hide the hole to put the ashes in.
Well, I had just put the hole in, so I haven't started hollowing or anything.
Well, I've been there and done that, and I took the bottom out and I put a different piece of wood in to accent the urn. And the hardwood dried and shifted at a different rate than the urn did, and you develop cracks along.
Of course it did.
The piece that you've glued in, and it just becomes a shit show. I mean, it's a nice shape, but you know, I've got these blemishes where the wood doesn't match, and there's a ledge there where one wood dried and shrank more than the other, so it's kind of a worthless piece.
So how dry was it when you put the base on?
It seemed dry. I mean, I rough turn my urns and I leave them in the shop and dry them for months, and it still did that. It just not good.
Just say the only way you can tell if they're really dry is to weigh them, because moisture meter will only go down to about 6% and gives up.
It won't tell you if it's dry, David. Just tell you if it's reached equilibrium. It's still going to be whatever moisture content there is in your shop. Unless you're going to kiln dry it, that's the only way to be 100% sure you can ship it anywhere and not have it move or crack. And even then, if it sits in a wet environment, it'll lose that kiln dry.
So then you get it completely dry and you glue it together, and someone buys it who lives in Florence, and it absorbs water and does the exact same thing in the opposite direction.
I suppose if you use the same species of wood, you'd have a little better luck, but depending on the direction of the grain, you might still have issues, right?
Right, but if you use the same species of wood, then it's not going to look like the transition is a design element. It's going to look like a mistake.
Unless I color the wood in some manner.
Maybe, yeah.
So Steve, when you make those urns like that, the question I usually have when I'm doing that is, what's the safest dimension of the base to keep it from toppling over? I've always heard that 1/3, 2/3 type rule. Or
some of mine are pretty unstable, I guess I'd say. I'm not sure that I've come up with the correct dimension. What do you think, Kevin?
I don't know. I've been accused of turning too small a feet on a lot of my stuff, but I think it's not just the size of the foot, but also how you have the weight distributed. So if you leave it the wall thickness a little thicker towards the bottom as well, and leave it a little bit more thickness, you can get away with this kind of smaller foot and still have stability. But once it's full of ashes, I don't know. I have one urn that I've turned that's been, and it's rough turned, it's been drying, so I haven't actually filled it and seen what it does yet.
Right.
I've finished a piece. In fact, it's really pretty. I mean, someone had done on show and tell several months ago where they had built a separate base, and it was very thin. Relatively, not wide as a base, so it tends to make it top heavy. And I have a piece that's very similar to that. The way I built it, I had to get the tenon off the thing, off the bottom. And it's now, as I put it on the ground, it has this very, put it on the table, has this very slight wobble to it. And I tried just taking some hand sanding and tried to do it that way. It just wasn't working. So I wonder if I could take a pad sander to the bottom of it, something to get that thing to sit flat, because it's got this very slight wobble to it, and it's already
If I need to flatten a foot, I put down a piece of sandpaper on a solid surface, something that I know is flat, MDF or something, and then just hold the piece and just move it back and forth.
Yeah, that's
or spin it a little
Right.
bit, and you can get that flat. It doesn't have to be heavy grit. I use like 220, and it just needs a little usually.
Right.
Unless it's really warped like crazy, but.
Good idea, Kevin.
This
I'll
is
try
the,
that.
This is the urn I turned. It's got a foot. It was turned on pits, so I drilled it out. It's got a hole in it, but it's, I don't know. Maybe it's about a third. We'll see.
So I try 2/3 of the widest point at the top.
You look like an Aussie.
Yeah. Two-thirds of the widest point at the top for the base, if I want it to be really stable.
Looks to me like a Coast Guard Ranger.
One of those cowboy Coast Guard guys.
Yeah.
So John, you're saying the
yeah,
base is,
yeah.
John, you're saying the base is 2/3 or 1/3?
I try 2/3 if I'm doing an urn. I try to make
Okay,
it a little wider.
So if it's 6 inches, you go for a 4-inch base?
Yeah, 4 inches or just below it, pretty close.
Okay.
Because if not, when they fill it up, it gets too heavy at the top. And then for glue, if I'm going to glue a base on there, I have switched to using only Type Bond 3, because when it shifts, the Type Bond 3 seems to hold better. If it shifts, I don't use the CA glue to join two pieces like that, just because I don't want it to ever shift once I get it glued up.
Yeah, I think glue, wood glue works a whole lot better if you have time to let it set.
Yeah. And a way to clamp it together.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can't clamp it like super tight, because earlier on, I was clamping them too tight and forcing too much of the glue out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want a fair amount of pressure, but you don't want to like reef down on it. You want enough to hold it together and make the seam look, so it doesn't have any gaps. But if you put too much pressure on it, I have found that you can, especially on tight grain wood, you can push too much of the glue out, and your glue joint will fail.
Yeah, well, Type Bond it'll dry. It'll dry quick enough that you can remove the clamps within probably 20-30 minutes.
Oh yeah.
Just let it dry. But I always try to, if I want to glue something, try to do it when it's still on the lathe with the tailstock bringing up the pressure. But you're right, you crank it down, all your glue's gone.
Does it make sense to take the two pieces that you're gluing together and wet them slightly with the idea that the glue is going to get into the pores a little bit on the wood?
You mean wet it with wood? Wet it with water?
Yeah.
No, if you just use your finger to spread the glue, that's probably
there's plenty of water in that glue. So you don't need to do that. The glue will wick in. They've done some experiments where the glue is actually stronger than the wood around it. So
yeah,
I wouldn't worry.
But you got to do both sides. You can't just put it on one side.
Yeah, you want to make got a good glue, and when you apply the pressure, you want enough to make sure that there's a squeeze out, so there's a good coverage. But you don't want to make it so tight that the gap is like non-existent.
Right, and I glue both sides too, and I let it sit for a couple of minutes, let it get tacky and then put it together.
Yeah. Okay.
But I have a whole can full or bucket full of things that I went too far or broke apart or gonna be firewood someday.
With the polyurethane glues like Type Bond 3 and the Gorilla Glue, it actually does work better if you wet the surfaces a little bit. It draws the glue into the fiber a little bit better.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, Mike.
Now with the other glues like the other Type Bonds and Elmer's, and that's not true. It's just that specific. The urethane, the brown looking.
Yeah, I know that for Gorilla Glue. What did you say where the other one was?
The Type Bond 3.
So why is that the case?
It's the attraction of the water in the fiber of the wood for the urethane in the glue itself.
But why wouldn't that be true for all glues?
For the nature of the nature of the glue itself, the resin. The polyurethane glues are very, very small molecules coming together to make bonds. So they have some flexibility where they can go. Whereas like Type Bond 2 or Elmer's, those are fairly long casing derivatives. They're fairly large molecules that just sort of fold down where they will go. The water tracking is unique to the polyurethane glues.
Thank you.
And that's Type Bond 3, you said?
Yeah. Better things for better living through chemistry.
Yeah, for everything. So I haven't had a problem so far, but
no.
Really
and wood is usually damp enough that there's enough water there to get it in, and it will, even if it's completely dry. I mean, they sell Type Bond 3 in Phoenix, the driest place I've ever been, and it works just fine. But if you have a small glue joint, that little bit of extra sticky might help.
Have you had luck with Gorilla Glue? Because I hate the stuff.
You have to keep it clamped longer than you think you ever should, because it will expand. That same chemistry that draws it together will actually push the wood apart unless it's clamped in place.
Yeah,
I don't like Gorilla Glue either.
I've tried it and I don't like it at all.
The Type Bond 3, which is the same base adhesive structure, doesn't generate that much force. You need to clamp it, but not forever.
I have to go look, see what Type Bond I have, because
if it's Type Bond 3 is brown, you can't really miss it.
Actually, Type Bond 3 is just a standard yellow color, but it's not.
Yeah,
it's not really.
That's what I thought.
But if you feel it, it's sticky. It has more texture than Type Bond 1 and 2.
Huh.
I've got another question.
Yeah, go ahead, Dean.
My wife bought me a Beall buffing system for my birthday.
Good for her.
And love it. In fact, the first piece I did was that urn, which the body of it is maple, and it made it really nice. So just a general question about using that. What pre-finish is buffable and what isn't? That's one question. And what species of wood tend to work better than others? Are there any species of wood that wouldn't work on that?
Mahogany.
Say again, Mike?
Mahogany and black walnut will pick up the paste. The Tripoli step is kind of a waste of time, because actually by the time you do the calculation for the effective grit with Tripoli, you're like 600, so it's just not worth the effort. Mahogany, anything with a prominent medullary race structure is going to pick up that stuff from the wheel, and it's going to be on the surface, and it's hard to get rid of. A very dense wood it's not a problem. I use the white diamond and the wax wheels, and it's very useful. Somehow the white diamond is not as sticky.
I use the
Yeah, I
white
got-
diamond wheel with no compound on it on those woods like walnut, and it'll usually buff up in oil to a
Oh,
shine
yeah.
without anything
Yeah.
getting in the fiber. Just
And
the friction, you know.
if you've got an oil surface or a wax surface on it, just those linen wheels do a good job of basically burnishing the grain,
Mhm.
making it.
What
shine.
about open grains like oaks? Does that AAA or the white diamond get into the pores?
Yeah. The Tripoli certainly will. The white diamond seems to stick to itself good enough that you can just buff it out.
Okay.
You'll see it build up, but you keep buffing it and it will come out. I think the heat melts it a little bit and sort of flows out. Taking a piece of oak and putting a shine on it, I always stop and think, is that really what it's supposed to look like? Oak is something to me that should have a softer sort of look to the finish, not plasticky. It should look silky, I guess, for a better word. It should look soft. And the high count abrasives and actually a buffed wax gives me a look on oak that I don't really care for. And when it comes to finishing wood, as I have said many times, there's only one question, and that is, what do you like? So if you like it, you do it.
And so what I've done is I've gone into my all my pieces I have lying around it and picked out the handful of them where I would like that glassier, that shinier look that I would get from the buffing system. It's that they're most of them are just finished in walnut oil, so those will buff up fine.
Those will buff up just fine. Yeah.
But I've got other finishes on there. I've used that OB Shine juice. I think Steve, you had mentioned that once. That I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It's a boiled linseed oil,
Black.
shellac, and denatured alcohol.
It's a high build friction polish. Yeah.
Now whether I could do the Beall system on something that's finished with that way, I don't know.
Sure.
Of course, that
would work just fine.
It already has a shine. It's a different look.
Skip the Triple E for sure.
Yeah.
All right.
I found just, if you're going to use, I do a lot of spheres and things like that, and I don't put a finish on them. I just buff them on that system. And I start with Triple E, and you can tell right away whether it's going to do a good thing or a bad thing.
Right.
So start out, take a look at it, and but I found with raw wood, if I don't want to put a finish on, the Beall system will do a really nice.
Right.
And I had a question for Mike: is once you put a finish on any of your stuff, how long should you wait until you do buff it?
Depends on the finish. Something like the high build friction polish, the oil shellac alcohols. If you friction polish that on the lathe, it's pretty well done. Now the linseed oil, if it hasn't burst into flames by then, will set up pretty quickly. I always find that you can smell the oil better than feel it, particularly linseed oil, because it has a stronger smell.
So Roger, did I hear you say that you can use the Beall system on raw wood without having?
Yeah.
And should I skip the Triple E when I do that, or should I use?
No, I would start with Triple E.
Yeah.
All right.
It depends on the wood. If you're getting brown goo stuck in the race structure of the wood, stop.
Yeah.
All right, then another question.
Well, but let me follow up on what Mike just said. One big problem with the Beall system is a lot of people will load the wheels up way too much.
Yeah.
And what you need to do, especially if you're getting wax on your piece, is just take a piece of 80 grit or 60 grit sandpaper and clean them up. But especially on the wax wheel, you just need to touch it for a second, and you've got enough wax. Otherwise, it just builds up, and then it's hard to get rid of. Go ahead, your second question.
Yeah, with regard to that shine juice, when I made it, I don't have any boiled linseed oil, which is what I read is that third ingredient. So I used a walnut oil instead. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah.
So on your Beall system, I assume you're putting that on your lathe and using your lathe as a power head?
Yes, and in fact, I've got the one that's got the long mandrel, so I can mount all three wheels at a time.
And how fast do you turn that?
Gosh, that did what the instruction said. It's fairly fast. I think it's up there 17 or 1800, or is it? Can't
I run
recall.
mine a little slow.
It's
I
at
run mine
least
about 14.
1500, no more than 2000. So.
Well, I crank mine
Yeah,
up.
I mounted mine.
I
I
crank
mounted
mine up.
mine on a.
Go ahead, John.
I mounted mine on a 1-horse motor that turns at 1780. And any slower than that, I found it to be, when I used it on my lathe, if you're doing any slower than 1780 to 2500, then it just doesn't work as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, I
So
crank mine
lathe
up.
speed is critical.
I run about 2400, 2500.
Remember that the speed of the lathe is not only driving the abrasion process, it's also making the carrier of fluid. So if you don't spin it fast enough, that wax, clay, pasty stuff that the abrasive is in is going to stay behind. If you spin it fast enough, it gets hot, it melts the base and draws it back into the wheel. So you're not going to have as much stuck on your surface, but you still accomplish the abrasion.
So what is buffing doing in comparison to, say, sanding with really high grits? Is it abrading? Is it?
Well, explain the difference between abrasion and sanding.
Well, that clearly are the same, but there's something like polishing wax, right? Where is that just a very fine abrasion?
When you polish wax, you're not cutting the surface, you're melting it.
You're filling the pores.
You're melting it, and you're allowing it to puddle again with a smooth surface. You know, it's if you take wax and pour a drop out onto a piece of wood, and you sand it, you have a rough surface. But if you put a torch across that, it melts and it goes back to that smooth surface. So the heat generated through the energy of the lathe on a wax finishing product is that you're allowing the wax to flow evenly across the surface and set up in a new flat distribution so that it's shining.
Okay, so with the Beall system, the Tripoli and the white diamond
You are sanding.
huh?
You are sanding.
Yeah, their abrasion, and then the wax wheel is applying heated wax. Thank you.
Now, wax is it's interesting. We think of wax as being slick, but if the rosin you put on a baseball bat is actually a wax. Wax can be a sticky surface. It will stick to itself. So by putting the wax onto the wheel, what you're doing is creating resistance to the fibers of the wheel going across the surface of the wood. That generates heat, that melts the wax and allows it to flow.
Thank you.
So to that point, Mike, to that point, when I'm doing the waxing, the last level there, I should I'm wondering how much force I should take my piece and bury it into that wheel.
Well, if it starts to burn, then you're doing too much. If it rips it out of your hand, that's too much. Less than that is enough. You can tell. You can see, as you push it in, you'll see a shine come up as a consequence of the wheel. And when you start getting that shine, it will also feel slippery. As the wax melts, your wheel's going to slide better across the surface. That's the pressure you need to be putting on.
Yeah, I think I need to get my wheel going faster too, because I think I've done it. I think the fastest I've done it is somewhere up there at 18 or 1900.
Well, that should be fast enough, really. You may also have too much wax on the wheel.
Yeah.
Too much of a good thing. Like Roger said, if you take sandpaper or the sandpaper dressing blocks, that'll knock the wax off, or just run it across a piece of wood.
Yeah, and in spite of
Something with a
reading,
corner.
in spite of reading the directions that says you don't need a lot on there, I probably have too much.
Everyone does. You just
We all do.
instinctively stick that goop on there. And
One of the,
it's particularly important with the triple E and the white diamond, because you can load that wheel up very quickly.
Yeah.
One of the things I like to do with my, what was that, Roger?
No, go ahead.
I'll say one of the things I like to do with my bleach pieces is I'll spray them with matte acrylic spray. And then I use the dry white diamond wheel with a slower speed and light touch. And I don't know if it's melting the surface or what it is, but it'll take it to a shine. And then kind of gives it that stone look. Looks kind of like alabaster.
That's fine.
And I leave it alone.
Sort of a luminescence.
What do you put on,
it
Kevin?
takes it from matte to it just smooths it and shines it.
Yeah.
What was that first layer? What finish you
Hold on a
put on?
second. Hold on a second. You guys leaving?
Yeah.
All right, love you, bye.
I find that the
It's a
carnauba,
matte acrylic spray.
Say it again.
Matte acrylic. Let me show you.
All right.
It's just an artist fixative.
It's a fixative.
I find that I gotta wait overnight for the carnauba wax to really set up, and then I use a terry cloth and just hand polish it for the last step.
Yeah.
one of the best finishes I have found, I discovered by accident. I think it might have been the same spray Kevin was using. The Krylon, is that the 3011 or something, Kevin?
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was John Jordan said all his pieces he finishes with that. So I bought a few cans of it and I sprayed a candlestick that I had made, and that is a dead flat finish. And I wanted to have a little bit of shine, so I used the Beall system with white diamond, and then instead of using the carnauba wax, I used Renaissance wax. I had a separate wheel that I used for that. And boy, did the shine and the smoothness of that was spectacular.
And that's what I do. Exact same thing, except I don't put the wax on, but yeah.
Yeah, somewhere floating around, we have the wax blocks that I made for the auction.
Yeah.
I use the same wax as Renaissance, the Cosmoloid 80H, because it's first of all, for reasons we don't need to go into, a better wax surface, but it shines up very nicely. And the reason the carnauba wax has to sit a little bit, John, where'd Beechwood go? Is that the carnauba wax, as it's isolated, carries with it some of the protein from the palm tree. So you wind up with a contaminant in the wax that will bind water. Well, when you make the wax surface, the water goes in and it stays there, and eventually will come back out as eventually excluded by the wax partitioning. So yeah, that's carnauba. That's why carnauba wax also fingerprints, gets water spots. They will eventually go away if you let the wood give the wood time to equilibrate with the environment again. Let the water go back out of it.
Is that why I've heard of it potentially attracting mold too? Is that the same reason then?
Mold can eat anything, and because it will hold a little bit of water, the mold, that gives it a place to. And that's why wet feet breed athlete's foot. Fun fungus like wet places.
So is this
Well-
being taped? Is this being taped and going to be put on the website?
It is, yes.
I'm going to need to re-listen to the whole thing because there's a lot of notes I need to be writing.
Well, one note you need to keep is whenever you're buffing, there, as hard as you try, there's going to be pieces that are going to fly away from you.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
keep your face mask on, and I can't tell you how many times, you know, I'm done. That's the last thing I'm doing, and the damn thing flies off, and I've got a
Or-
nick.
And put
I wear my nitrile gloves too. It just gives me a little
Yeah.
more grip.
Yep.
put a piece of rug over the surface of the lathe so that if it goes down, it doesn't hit a metal surface.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a question about this vase. This is a piece of figured maple, and I put an initial coat of Danish oil on it, and then I let it dry, and I took the initial coat off with sandpaper, and then my usual practice is to apply another coat, let it dry, sand it off until my last coat doesn't have any dry spots. You've got uniform distribution of wax through the wood. Well, I put my initial coat on and I've sanded it off, and then I looked at the figure and I decided I'd rather add some color to it, but I've already got a coat of wax on there, or not wax, oil in there.
Well,
And I don't think I can really go back and stain the thing now that I have a coat of oil in there, because that probably will inhibit the penetration of any stain that I might use on this.
yeah,
Do
very
you
well.
guys think I could go back and put color on this thing, or do you think I'm already obligated to plain oil finish, given that I've already put on a coat of oil?
If you sanded back the first coat of the Danish oil, right?
Right, but
Use like a
the
sanding
end
seal.
green pieces, like where there's bird's eye figure and such, that oil
Soak
is
it in.
going to penetrate deeply into that end grain.
It is.
And so the parts that you're most wanting to highlight are the parts that are probably already filled with oil.
Yeah. Well, the Danish oils, although they're not drying oils, they have drying agents, so they will harden actually in the
Right.
wood. You
There's
can
poly in it,
might be
too.
able to sand off some of it, and if you use a colored Danish oil the second time, you might be able to slide some in.
Mm.
Or you could dye it. Yeah, put the dye in the oil maybe.
Get
So,
the alcohol based dye and put some color in that, and there's nothing that says you have to color the whole piece. Just color those pieces, the end grain, and maybe you can get something you want that way.
Okay.
I'm curious, you say you're sanding between coats. Are you just
Right.
doing like a light sanding to remove any nibs or something, or
Well,
you're
the
going back to
oil,
80 grit or something?
no, I don't go back to 80 grit. I usually go back to like a 180. And so the oil, when you initially put it on a raw piece, will penetrate some areas real deeply, and you'll end up with dry patches where it's penetrated deeply. And then
Right.
in the flat sawn areas, it's going to ride on the surface and you'll get a shinier. And so you have this mix when it dries of dry areas where it's penetrated more deeply, and then wet areas where it's staying on the surface. And to keep the flat sawn areas from getting thick and gummy when you keep reapplying different coats, you kind of knock that back with that 180 grit and take off the surface there. And then you reapply until you finally get uniform filling. If you fill the end grain pieces, the parts that are end grain by repeated coats, then that last coat, when that's finally filled, will be nice and shiny and equal and even. And so
Okay.
a piece like this, I might end up putting, 10 plus coats of oil on it to fill the end grain pieces,
Yeah.
sanding between each one. So it's pretty time intensive and pretty much pain in the rear, but you get
How
a
long
better
do you-
finish that
How
way.
long do you let it dry before you sand?
Usually overnight.
Okay, yeah, take some time.
It does. It
Uh,
does.
The way you can get around that is just using a sanding sealer. Treat it with a diluted shellac before you start to put your oil on. That will fill up some of the those places that are going to be dry, So you're giving yourself a head start as far as building up finish.
Do you still get the depth of finish in terms of how it looks?
Yep.
Okay,
What you're doing is just kind of filling the bottom of the well.
maybe that'll save me some time.
It'll save you some coats.
Okay,
It'll save you a couple of days, and it'll also leave you with a finish that's smooth as the baby's bottom.
okay.
Okay. Okay, guys, we have another meeting following this. For those who are part of that with Dave Wood, stay on. Otherwise, I'll have a recording of this in a couple days up on the YouTube. So you'll be able to go back and take a look at it. And I learned quite a few things. I hopefully
Yeah, me too.
Been a good session.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I got a lot of really good information. So thanks everybody for humoring me.
Why don't we take
Great day.
well, we take a 2-minute break and then we'll start with you, Dave.
Okay,
Coffee.
fair enough.
Thanks everyone.
More coffee.
Yeah.
Thanks, that was good.